Just checking in to make sure we can all hear each other. General nodding of heads. Okay, so we've got a full muster in attendance this morning, and given that this is the first of the series of hearings for this year, there's some additional people in terms of officials that we'll introduce shortly. So I think the most appropriate way, the most appropriate way is we'll commence with our karakia just to open our proceedings. So I'll just open with that formality. The whakataka hau ki te uru, whakataka hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. Ki hiaki ana te atakura, ki tiu, ki huka, ki heihu, ti hei Māori ora.
Māori ora.
So my name's Brendan Duffy, the chair of the commission, and to you, Mayor Black, it's fantastic that you're first up this time round, and welcome to this process. I'm not sure whether you've been through it before, but it's not as torturous as it looks. So we'll just go through calmly and carefully, and I'm sure you'll find that the process. Oh gosh, what's happened? What have I done? Can you hear me?
Hear you.
I've lost everything.
Well, we can hear you fine. And we can see you.
Oh, can you? Okay, so I've obviously done something this end which is calamitous. So look, probably the best way to commence the process is for us to introduce ourselves to you, Mayor Black and Council, and then you'll do your introductions, and then we can go into the formal process. So I'll just kick off by acknowledging that I'm a former mayor of Horowhenua, been on council for about 21 years, and have had the last half a dozen years on the local government commission. Had a variety of roles, but this is a role which is particularly important because it's about the purest principles of democracy and representation. So I'll pass through now to fellow Commissioner Bigham, and then we'll go through to Commissioner Bidrose.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Can everybody hear me? Just checking we're all good. Kapai, thank you. Tēnā rā koutou katoa, nei rā te mihi atu tēnei uri o Taranaki Maunga kia koutou. I am Bonita Bigham. I am a current Taranaki Māori Ward Councillor on Taranaki Regional Council, former Community Board member in South Taranaki, and a 3-term South Taranaki Councillor also. I have been part of the commission now as a commissioner for coming on, I think, about 3 years, and am grateful for the opportunity to meet with you all this morning. Kia ora.
I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā iwi, e rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora hui mai tātou katoa. Ko Sue Bidrose tōku ingoa. I'm one of the commissioners at the Local Government Commission. I've been on the commission for a couple of years, and in an earlier incantation of my life, I was Chief Executive of Dunedin City Council for a number of years. I have a strong passion for the local government sector, so I'm really looking forward to meeting with you all and hearing through the issues today. Thank you very much for having us.
That's the introductions from the commissioners, and on the screen there are some support officials. So we've got our CEO Penny Langley, and we've got our advisor to this particular hearing. You'll see Courtney on the screen there. And then Donald is also on the screen, who is a long-standing advisor to the Local Government Commission. And Emma's our tech person today, no, she's not. Addie's our tech person who's making sure everything goes according to plan. And we can't see Emma, but just trust us, she's there, also from the commission. So that's introductions from our side. We'll move over to you, Mayor Black, and ask for your introductions, and then we'll go into some proceedings from there.
Yes, good morning. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. As you've mentioned, my name is Mari Black and I'm the Mayor of the Hurunui District. I was first elected to council in 2010 and I'm in my second term as Mayor of our district. Alongside me today, I have the Chair of our Audit and Risk Committee. To my left is Councillor Fiona Harris. And in support, I also have the CEO of the Hurunui District, Hamish Dobby, to my right, and also Team Leader for Governance, Michelle Stanley. So we are all sitting at this top table. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
So look, the only other observation to make is that the commission process is quasi-judicial, so it is a formal process. We know that we're here because you've gone through consultation with your community. You've resolved some decisions. Some people in the community have appealed, and that means that it comes to the commission for us to deliberate on and make a final decision. So that's the reason that we are here. So the process from here is that you'll introduce your summary. Obviously, we've read all the information that's been presented to us, but you'll summarise how you got to the decision that you've gotten to. Through that process, commissioners may want to ask questions, or we might wait to the end and then go into a bit more detail. Those questions don't have to be answered immediately. They can be answered in the right of reply later on in the morning, rather than putting any additional pressure on. We'll then hear from those submitters who have chosen to speak, and again, we'll ask questions. We'll take a wee break, or depending on how we're going for timing, we'll take the right of reply, and that'll give the commissioners the chance to get those additional points of clarity, and then we'll break. We'll go away and make our own deliberations independently, and then that'll get advised back to council. So that's the process that will follow. So you can be confident that the commissioners have read all the information that's been provided, and I think you can also be confident that officials have been talking with your officials, seeking extra information as necessary. So we're in your hands now for you to summarise, give us your perspective, and then we'll go from there.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Commissioner Duffy. I appreciate those outlining the process, but I am going to read my account of the robust process that we have gone through on behalf of Hurunui District Council. So just to give some context, in 2017, a representational review was a substantial review which resulted in the change of the ward system from a 5-ward structure to a 3-ward system. The change that was required at that time was due to the population member ratio falling within plus or minus 10%. Also at this time, an in-depth analysis of communities of interest was undertaken, which led to that 3-ward change. The working group for this time also considered the in-depth analysis, but determined that the analysis back in 2017 remained fit for purpose and still current. However, as you're very aware, the Hurunui District Council undertook the current review as defined by the Local Electoral Act to consider the structure of its membership, the way it is elected, which in turn can affect whether members come from a ward or at large across the district, the boundaries of the ward or the constituencies or names of the ward or constituencies ahead of the 2025 elections. Today, I'm here to represent the majority decision of the Hurunui District Council in support of that process. What I plan to do is take you through the working group process, and then I will continue on to the more formal process from the Hurunui District Council's perspective. But to give some history to this, on the 25th of July 2023, a paper was presented to Council to consider the representational arrangements leading into the upcoming 2025 election. As it had been 6 years since the last review, our council, like others, have a statutory obligation to undertake the review, which allows a local authority to take a fresh look at the structure of its membership and the way it is elected. Council determined, as confirmed by the minutes of the 25th of July, that a formation of a small working group consisting of councillors, the Chief Executive Officer, with support from the governance team leader to assist and progress the review process. It was agreed by elected members that a small working group would be a more efficient and effective way to sort through the various options, providing detailed and dedicated attention to the matters that require consideration and report back to full council. Noting that the hearing and deliberation of any public submission will remain the responsibility of council. Councillors Vanessa McPherson, Pauline White, Karen Armstrong and Tom Davies were appointed to form a working group. So for ease of understanding, I will plan to work through the workshop procedures that were undertaken by the working group that I've just talked about. I will cover off the topics that took place and provide more detail of the outcome procedures through the formal council meetings later in my presentation. Initially, there were 2 workshops held which covered, and I'll just work through these for you, the purpose of the review, to ensure those electoral arrangements were fair, there was equity of access, enable citizens to discuss the nature and effective representation of their area, contribute to the experience of democracy and contribute to the perception of reality that our democratic processes are transparent, fair and just. Other issues that were followed through were the electoral system, the Māori wards, the principles of the review, as I've already talked about, communities of interest in regard to perceptions of dimensions, the sense of belonging, similarities in demographic, socioeconomic and ethnicity, and distinct social history. Also under consideration from the working group was actually the functionality of their local service boundaries and workshop patterns, the things that bring people together, schools, recreation, cultural activities, retail outlets, communication links and transport. Consideration also was given to the effective representation of communities of interest. How many councillors, how many wards? Community boards were also discussed at that time, and the consideration for the community board was around the characteristic of the community, isolation or sense of identity, consideration of the probability of communities of interest that have distinct elected representation, opportunities for communities to influence council policy, agenda and decision making. Looking at more efficiency for local decisions to be made in close proximity to neighbourhoods and localities. The consideration of the local community board, should there be a community board, and if yes, what was the nature of that community and the structure of the community board? Further consideration through workshopping was held on the 7th of September, and that was to consider the democratic and effective local government to recognise the diversity of New Zealand communities, in particular Māori wards, and initial engagement with our 2 runanga. A further workshop on the 23rd of November looked at the statistics NZ population based, and you will be very aware that we had to consider the basis of the 2018 census data. The workshop considered that we were aware that did not necessarily reflect the population growth of the Hurunui. The role of the community board was also discussed at that time, and the council would look at the creation of a community board as part of the representational review, really in regard to the representation and act as an advocate in the interest of its community, to consider and report all matters referred to it by the territorial authority, and maintain an overview of services provided by the territorial authority within the community. So all of these issues were considered in context by the working group, and as I'll talk to later, report to council. There was also discussion around the status quo across the district. What would one community board look like? would the group consider less councillors around the table and more community boards? So it looked at the full context of representation across the district. And the final workshop on the 13th of February actually determined some options for presentation to our council meeting. Options looked at between the status quo, a status quo plus one new community board, an increase of councillor numbers in the South Ward, 11 in total. Sorry, that's 11 councillors across the district, or decrease the councillor numbers to 5, one mayor and a community board in our west, east and south communities. So the working group did a lot of the intense work to discuss, to determine and then provide that full construct to council. The feedback from or to provide to council was to consider each of those options. The option 2, that the status quo plus the community board, was to some of the points in favour for that were to enable strategic thinking for the South Ward, which was thought to be missing currently, and that the current system lends to a more singular focus for members, and the link to the advisory groups and other groups could be maintained through councillor involvement. The working group also considered some of the cons around that option, and that was the extra cost to the South Ward ratepayers and the risk of a heavy weighted of elected members from one area. So the working group did a lot of the discovery, I guess, about what the status quo or those other 3 options might be from a council perspective. What I would like to do now is perhaps take you through the more formal decision-making process. There will be a little bit of repetition as I talk through the process that actually came to full council for determination. So initially on the 29th of August 2023, a paper came to council with a recommendation from the working group for full council to consider the electoral system, Māori wards, should there be any pre-consultation options, or an overview of the review process and communities of interest. Council minutes do agree that we as council unanimously were in support of the representational review working group to retain the status quo of first past the post voting method for the 2025 elections. On the 26th of September 23, a paper was presented to council recommending not to form a Māori ward at this point of the 25 elections, but to continue to review options for a Māori ward in the future. Council agreed unanimously to support this following the working group having a hui with the chair, Hariata Kahu, who is the chair of Te Runanga o Kaikoura, and with feedback from Tina Ngāi Hariri Runanga in Tuahiwi, because she was unable to be present on that day. The working group, following that discussion, noted that it was of the utmost importance that we continue to work with Ngāti Kuri as Ngāti Whenua of the northern part of the Hurunui district. The review of the runanga on Māori wards is that while it is great to have a voting position at a council table for Māori to give a Māori lens and have voice on decision making, it is an important position that is open to, that it would be open to any person of Māori descent, and the representative does not need to necessarily live in the district. So that was the advice that we were given from our chairs, from our two runanga. The runanga also stated that they would prefer to form a strong relationship or continue to build a strong relationship with our council and look for other ways to have a say and vote at the council table. It was agreed that not to progress a Māori ward, however, the option should be considered at a later time. That takes us through to the 30th of January 2024, when the working group sought feedback on the 4 options ahead of the formal process coming to council in February. The working group discussion points included the population stats from Stats NZ. Given that they're based on the 2018 census and noting that the recent high population growth in the Hurunui had not generally been taken into account. The Local Government Commission has advised that the 2023 census data would not be released until May 24, and that only one set of population data could be used. And once the initial data proposal is resolved, it really cannot be changed. The Hurunui District Council were unable to make its own population statistics and must use the population estimates as prepared by Stats NZ. With the up-to-date population data being unavailable for use, the working group were mindful of the population change, especially in the South Ward, which led to the option to introduce a new community board. The working group took into account the plausibility of having a community board. It was noted that the structure could help with a more democratic and representative approach to membership. There was also discussion on the power and the delegation of that community board. It was specifically noted that while community boards have specific rights under law, this council currently chooses to delegate the same powers to our community committees as they do a similar amount of work. It was suggested that an elected community board in the South Ward would bring some strategic focus, and was noted that this was not happening under the current makeup. The current membership consists of members representing their own single interest area who are brought together into a ward committee without the overview needed to provide strategic direction for the ward. It was noted that due to the current structure, the local councillors often dominate the discussion to provide the strategic direction rather than committee members. It was cautioned that to maintain the link between advisory groups and the community board, councillors would need to continue to attend these community meetings and report back to the community board as needed. It was also considered that the option of only in the South Ward and not other areas is mainly due to the urban versus rural makeup. The working group are considering recommending that the representational review is completed in 3 years when the population data is based on the latest census information. On the 12th of March 2024, elected members were presented with a paper that outlined the representational review initial proposal for consultation and to adopt the statement of proposal and an engagement communication plan for consultation. The report was written as a statutory requirement on behalf of the Representative Review Working Group. The recommendation to Hurunui District Council at that meeting on the 12th of March 24 agreed to accept the initial proposal for the 23 to 25 representational review as follows: 1 mayor and 10 councillors, with the mayor elected at large, 4 councillors from the West Ward, 2 councillors from the East Ward and 4 councillors from the South Ward. To keep the 3 ward boundaries, East, West and South, with the same boundaries, retain the Hammer Springs Community Board with its 5 elected members and 1 councillor representative from the West Ward, and to establish a South Ward Community Board with 5 elected members and 4 councillor representatives from the South Ward. The elected members will be elected from 2 subdivisions, these being Amberley Township with 2 members and the rest of the ward with 3 elected members. The council adopted the statement of proposal for the 25 representational review subject to any amendments. The council also approved the engagement and communication plan for the review. The working group had discussed the formation of the South Ward Community Board, giving due consideration to would the board be inappropriate for the efficient and effective performance of their role? Is the South Ward a significantly distinct community of interest to merit a community board? Is the proposed subdivision appropriate under this lens? Will an elected community board enhance effectiveness, efficiency and sustainability of local governance of the South Ward? Will it enhance and support the local economy? The Representational Review Working Group considered that a community board would promote good local governance, enhancing effectiveness and efficiency of decision-making of the South Ward. The South Ward is rapidly growing, with more work to progress in a strategic, forward-thinking manner. Of particular concern was noted the added cost to the South Ward ratepayer. The confirmed minutes of the council meeting dated the 12th of March 24 indicate the discussion and outcome of the meeting, noting in particular, number one, councillors spoke of general support for the proposal, but questioned 4 councillors on the board with only 5 elected members from the community. The ratio is understood, with during the process being the only time to make this change. One submitter suggesting 2 councillors under rotation at 18 months, halfway through the triennium. Number 2, councillors emphasised the full support of the proposal and believed the outcome would be hugely beneficial, stating that there had been observed other community boards and the election process brings out a different spectrum of people. Further stating that although the 2 subdivision was proposed in this option, the community of interest as a whole glued together the common facilities and activities for shopping, business and gathering places, and that 2 subdivisions was a further complication. When comparisons were sought with the existing Hammer Springs Community Board, Council considered that elected members were reflective of a varied community, always had strong debate, but agreement was found in the best interest of Hammer Springs. Council unanimously agreed to the first 3 that I've indicated. Then Hurunui District Council passed the resolution that Council establish a South Ward Community Board with 5 elected members and 4 council representatives from the South Ward. Further deliberation in regard to the proposal for subdivision, that elected South Ward Community Board members will be elected from 2 subdivisions, these being the Amberley Township with 2 elected members and the rest of the ward with 3 elected. This was carried on a majority vote, 6-5 on a show of hands. Council agreed that it is expected that all elected members across the ward would come together to work in the interests of the ward. Unanimously agreed, Council unanimously agreed to adopt the statement of proposal and the engagement and communication plan. On the 11th of June 2024, Council received the submissions on the representational review initial proposal and deliberated and recommended the final proposal. Council received 21 submissions in total, 4 requesting to speak to us. On that raw data, 13 submitters were against the formation of the South Ward Community Board. The splitting of the ward through subdivisions had similar response, with 8 in support for a subdivision and 13 against. Council determined that a fully elected community board would provide a different operational model and approach in comparison to the current structure, which is one of representatives from a variety of interest groups who come together with 3 independent members elected at the first meeting. Elected members would have the responsibility to keep in touch with their communities and interest groups and bring this feedback to the table. This would assist to make decisions and take forward the ward as a whole. Groups will not be excluded and will still have representation, acknowledging that it is different from the current model. The resolution of council was that council would establish a South Ward Community Board with 5 elected board members, 4 council representatives from the South Ward. The motion was agreed on majority vote. Members, however, would not be required to live in the ward, but would need to be nominated by someone in the ward. The same rules that apply for councillors. The resolution that followed was that council agreed that the 5 elected members for the South Ward Community Board be elected at large. And that negated the subdivisions that I've just spoken about. This motion was agreed on a majority vote. Just of interest for you around some growth statistics, that the growth in Amberley for the past few years, there has been substantial growth as evidenced through increasing housing and subdivision. Our LTP population estimations calculated that we will have increased and continued growth over the next 10-year period. Statistically, the South Ward is made up of 3 units, being Amberley Township, which has got about population of about 2,330, Balkeen, which is more rural, is 2,500, and a population statistic at the Ashley Forest of 790 people. The population growth in the South Ward since 2001 has almost doubled the rate of the rest of the district, based on the 2023 census data. So if that is a synopsis, I guess, of how the robust process that we have gone through as a council to determine that a South Ward Community Board would be the best fit for our community in the South Ward as ahead of the 2025 election. So thank you for taking some time to come and listen to us and to consider the process that the Hurunui District Council has undertaken in considering the representational review ahead of the local government elections for 2025. I'm happy to receive any questions that you may have at this point, and perhaps we might take those questions down and I can respond to those in my right of reply, if that works for you. Thank you.
That's perfect, Mayor Black. Thank you. I'll just let the commissioners kick off with questions, and maybe I can fill in some gaps after that.
Thank you.
Who's going to go first? Commissioner Bigham?
Awesome. Kia ora. Thank you. Very comprehensive summary of your process. Obviously a very robust process. I just have actually I've got about 3 or 4 questions. I'll kick off with the view of iwi obviously and not establishing a Māori ward. Was there any view expressed around the establishment of a South Community Board for the South Ward?
I guess the tone of that discussion was really around the establishment of a Māori ward per se across the district, as opposed to their view of South Ward.
No problem.
I'm probably supposed to be receiving those questions and responding after maybe, but
no problem. That's great. Let's have this conversation as we go. That's perfect. In many of the submissions around the establishment for the community board, there was a real concern around the nullification of the youth voice if a community board was established. And we understand the council has a youth council. How might those concerns be addressed if the feeling is that the youth voice from the council's own youth council is nullified through the establishment of a community board?
Yeah, that's fine. Like, what we'll do actually might be better if we I'll receive those and we're noting those. Thank you, Commissioner, and we'll respond in my right of reply. That makes
great
sense for everybody. Thank you.
Awesome. And my last question, can we have some numbers around the population changes? It would be interesting to know when you talk about, the changes, what kind of percentages or thousands of people has that actually been over what kind of period of time would be really helpful. Thank you. Those are my questions to kick off.
Good
Ngā
idea.
mihi.
So just to reinforce that before Commissioner Bidrose kicks in, the numbers, the population numbers, we're struggling to see what the actual number is in terms of growth. So it'll be really, really useful. Just assume we've got no knowledge of the geographical area. We've got percentages and we've got what you currently have, but we can't find anywhere where how many more people is it? So if that can be looked at, that will be most helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Bidrose.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very thorough and it was great giving that sense. I mean, it's much nicer hearing it from you than just reading it on paper. So thank you very much for talking us through. I've got a couple of questions. I guess my key issue is what's not working so well with your current community interface arrangements. And the thing you specifically mentioned when you talked to us was that they don't particularly have a strategic focus because they're each representing their own group. And that therefore on strategic thinking, your councillors tend to dominate. And I suppose have a particular concern that with a structure that has 5 elected representatives and 4 councillors, how you think that will change your councillors dominating that strategic thinking when the numbers are so much more preponderant, you've got so many less people representing your community. So I'd kind of be interested in your thinking about that. Yeah, and that focus on what's wrong currently with the status quo. It was interesting to hear you actually have some delegations to your current community arrangement. And would there be a way of, without doing away with your current community arrangement, can you think of any way that you could increase that strategic focus if that is in fact the main problem that didn't involve changing the representation structure? I'd be interested in your views on that. I think that's me.
Okay. So probably to just to round this out in a little more depth, I think Mayor Black, clearly our focus is specifically in this area where the appellants have made their objections around the proposition of a community board. And so that's really the reason why we're even having this hearing. So we're really keen to, there's a comment made about single interest individuals on the current community committee. How's that negated by an election? What happens if the same people get elected? Help us to understand what this means. What is an example of, you talked about strategic direction and the fact that a community board would provide that. We're pretty keen to understand, so what's not happening and what is the strategic direction? How does this just help us to understand that more deeply? And further, what consideration was given to, if the current community committee is, in inverted commas, not working, what could be done to support it working over and above the imposition? Imposition is probably the wrong word. The introduction of a community board and all that encompasses, which, as you'll see from some of the submitters in terms of additional cost and so on. So we're just trying to get that sense of, help us to understand what is it that's not happening at the moment, because we can't see anything. What's not working, and then explain how the introduction of a community board over a current community committee, where the new structure potentially is quite large, 5 community board members and four members of council on board. So that's the guts of why we're having this discussion, because that's the decision that we have to make. Appellants have said, no, we want to stick to the status quo. Excuse my throat, I'm getting the flu. Others have said, yeah, we kind of support it. So we've got to make the decision. We want to be very, very sure about what it is that we. So I think that kind of rounds out the general, and you'll have time to go away and formulate those answers, obviously. I'm just watching the calendar pretty carefully for time, and we are amazingly on time for our appellant to come on at 10 minutes past 10. So we do kind of like to stick to that. So can I just pass over to Ali, I think, who will now press the appropriate button to make the technology work.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're just bringing in Mr. Myers now.
Welcome, Mr. Myers. Can you hear us all right?
I can hear you fine, yes, thank you.
Perfect. And have you been observing up until now?
I joined about 20 to 10, so yes, I've caught up with the proceedings so far, yes.
Perfect. So you've got a good sense around where the discussion's gone so far.
Yes,
and
yes.
Now it's an opportunity for you to give us your perspective. You would have, just to be clear, you're familiar who the commissioners are?
Yes.
Yep, perfect. Okay, right. We're in your hands for your observations.
Okay.
And welcome.
Thank you. My name is Roy Myers. I'm chair of the Amberley District Residents Association. I've been chair for 12 years, and this is my third term on the ward committee. The essence of what I have to say is that a community board will not have the level of representation and accountability which is being achieved with the ward committee. Basically, I don't think it's broke, so it doesn't really need mending. The South Ward of Hurunui has 4 distinct residential districts, each with its own characteristics. Amberley is the largest area, rural service centre, sitting astride State Highway 1, with an expanding population, as you've heard from Mayor Black. It's grown significantly in the past 20 years and stands to grow over the future. Leithfield is an historic village which is about 5 kilometres south of Amberley, with a very active community and so on. Amberley Beach and Leithfield Beach are seaside communities which face challenges of sea level rise and the prospect of managed retreat. Now, each of these communities who are currently represented from their residents' associations on the ward committee are directly accountable to their residents' groups and report back to them on a regular basis, and in turn feed that into the discussion at the South Ward. Sports groups are currently represented on the ward committee through the Reserves Advisory Group. Reserves are quite a significant responsibility of the ward committee, and it's important that their particular interests and concerns are brought to that committee. Youth was mentioned, and it's a big concern, I think. There is a youth rep on the current committee who's selected from and accountable to their youth committee. It's not only important that youth views are expressed, I think it's important that a young person should be involved in the business of council. And it's an important process, I think, for them to have that. Now, alongside these 6 representatives from specific residential and, if you like, interest areas, there are 3 community representatives with no direct affiliation to a particular group, but who add a balance to the deliberations of the ward committee. And so that's quite important because they can come on without too much formality and put themselves forward. So currently we have 9 representatives covering the communities, sporting groups, young people, and community at large, who are directly accountable to the groups they represent. We do not feel, and that's the Residents Association, not only me, we do not feel that a community board of 5 members elected at large will represent the diversity of the South Ward or be directly accountable to those they represent, as the current arrangement is. Finally, I'd say that we recognise that local government has a problem with engagement with the communities they serve. The last election had a 43% turnout. The current ward committee is a demonstration of, in my view, grassroots democracy, has a high level of engagement and accountability, representing a range and diversity of interests and concerns, which is why we as a Residents Association believe that it should be preserved. That's my case.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we'll just give the opportunity for commissioners to engage for a moment and just get some questions.
Sure.
Same as before, we'll just go to Commissioner Bigham first and then to Commissioner Bidrose.
Oh, thank you, Roy, for your time this morning. Great to hear the work that you're putting in and that the committee's putting in. I just have a couple of questions around the makeup of the committee, and wonder, it's got a very set representation makeup. How do, with what we hear is an increasing population in the area, how do other groups, interest groups, other people who may want to contribute, other people who have a stake in the future of the South Ward, how do they get to influence or to be a part of the committee if it's got its current membership in place? And how often does that get reviewed?
Amberley is very interesting because as a sort of urban community, it's somewhat different to the village communities, which are much more focused in Leithfield and the beaches. And what tends to happen is that people coalesce around interests, around concerns. I mean, the most recent one being the location of tanks on a reserve, for example. So a group of people formed within that community, and they came forward to the committee and made a presentation, which is under consideration. So I think that's, those things are allowed to come forward through those channels. And those similar processes go on within the various residents groups.
Okay, so arguably, sorry, it's a bit loud feedback there somewhere.
No.
Just thinking then, arguably, with that to me seems like another level of bureaucracy that people would have to go through to get their messages across and up to council. Would not people directly elected onto a community board remove those other levels of bureaucracy to get the message across? Would not those people be even more directly accountable to those communities who elected them into those positions, rather than having to potentially come to your committee, make a presentation that then goes forward to council, etc., etc.?
I think the problem is what would be the forum from which the representatives elected onto the community board, what would be the forum that they would engage with the community? They would still be dependent on some sort of intermediary, I suspect, in terms of residents groups or activists coming forward, if you see what I mean.
I do. So then arguably it's those people who would then, like yourselves, would then go to the community board as the intermediaries rather than your committee being the intermediary. So I guess there's a different way of considering how those messages get through to council. So yeah, I was just throwing that idea out there as
it's yeah. I mean, I think particularly with Amberley, as we've said, it's a growing community, and it's its needs grow, as its needs grow, they need to be responded to. It's just the process by which that's achieved, really.
Great. Thank you.
But I'd also say that within the other communities, if you take the beach communities, for example, the particular situations that they confront, which are related to climate change, sea level rise, and the possibility of managed retreat and so on, and protecting their beach areas, there are those things that are ongoing issues, if you like.
Hilda, thank you.
Can I ask you, Roy, are you elected as chair of the Amberley Residents Association? Is there an election process?
Yes, there's yes.
And is it, do you have wide membership or is it relatively narrow?
Before the changes to the incorporated societies, we had a completely open membership, which was open to all residents in the South Ward. What we are now doing in the transition to the new incorporation rules is having a membership. But basically, our AGM is open to all residents within the South Ward to come along, and it's
and how many turn up, Roy? How many actually come?
Oh, well, I suppose we'd get to be realistic, between 30 and 50 people.
Lovely, thank you. Can you tell me how well do you feel, or do you have any sense of how well the Hanmer Springs Community Board functions in terms of representing that community through to the council? Sure,
I think Hanmer Springs is a very different community. I mean, that's sort of the point I'm making, really, is that it's a much more centred community, and it has a particular focus, because it's something of a resort, and it's very leisure focused in terms of activities. The South Ward is more diverse geographically, but also it's in a situation of flux in that it's growing, and I think it needs to be able to adapt to that. So I think the Hanmer Springs Community Board serves it well. It's also of interest that there is only one councillor on the Hanmer Springs Community Board against 4 in the South Ward proposal. And the other concern that I would have is that it sort of becomes council in a way, in that you've got 2 sets of elected members with that kind of bureaucratic structure, whereas at the moment it's much more open, and I would be in favour of that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's probably me for now.
Thank you.
Just one question back to you, Mayor Black, just to help us, the justification for the number of councillors on the proposal compared to Hanmer. It might be useful just to understand how come they've got 1 and these guys have got 4. That might be worth feeding back on later on. And so, Roy, again, that question about growth. Give me a number. What do you mean by growth?
Amberley used to have a sign when you went into it that said it had 1,011 residents.
Yeah.
I think that was in about 2000.
Yeah.
It now has over 3,000. So I think it's grown significantly. There's been significant development and the spatial planning exercise that they've just been through is projecting that expansion will continue. Whether it will be at the same rate or not, of course, I don't know. There are attractions to Amberley in the sense that it's basically within commuting distance of Christchurch, and people are beginning to look at it as a residential trust. It also has a high number of retirees, and we did estimate that the population was probably about a third over 65. But it's an attractive location for people to retire to.
Okay. Can you help me? How's the engagement currently with council? How do you rate it? How does it work? Are you happy or are you not? Just give me some sense of that relationship that occurs at the moment. Are you getting stuff done or not? With council.
Yeah. I think there's good communication with council, and I think the South Ward committee is working well with council. I mean, there's an example. We did a survey exercise, and one of the issues that came up was that people wanted a dog park, and we've had to go through a lot of engagement with the council to find opportunities for that dog park. But it's working well. And we can't just pluck it out of the air, but and so in order to fulfill that wish, if you like, we're having to work through things with council, and I think that happens on a number of other issues.
Okay. But just to round this out, and again, it's going back to you, Mayor Black. But in terms, a comment made earlier on was about strategic direction. So what I'm pretty keen to try and get a perspective on. I mean, I could say to you, Roy, what is the strategic direction over the next 5 years? And I probably should ask you that. But equally, from council's perspective, what is the strategic? Because one of the arguments for the introduction of the ward is, I think, is a more strengthened strategic direction. But so my question is, sorry, I've gone round and round in circles. Roy, do you have a sense of what the strategic activities may well are planned for in, say, the next 5 years? Have you got a sense of that?
One of the problems which hangs over us is finance. And for various reasons, the South Ward carries quite a lot of debt, and that to some extent inhibits what might be wanted. But obviously, what we're looking at is how the council might meet the needs of this expanding population in the town, but within the constraints that exist within actually financing those issues. Right. I don't know if that answers your question, but we're a bit hand to mouth, I think, is what I'm saying.
Okay. Commissioner Bigger.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Roy, I just have another question, or perhaps it may be more for the council, but we'll see where this lands. What involvement does your committee have in the current annual plan and long-term planning processes? Do you feel you have the ability, like if we're talking about strategic direction, that's when those conversations happen. Is your committee involved in any of those processes?
We make a point of making submissions to council on the issues that we think are relevant, and we made a submission on the long-term plan, and obviously we've made a submission on the representation review this time. But we select those issues that we think are relevant, and we're welcomed into the council chamber to present those.
Okay.
I think that needs to go back to you, dare I say it, Mayor Black, to try and give us a perspective from your position. What are the strategic? Give us some sense of that. So that the argument is, I think. Hold on, excuse me. Yeah, the council's argument was for a strengthened strategic direction. It will be useful for us to get a sense around what that might be. Because Roy is giving us a perspective as, well, we haven't got a lot of money, can't do much. And I'm kind of thinking, how does that work? So I think that will be helpful in the wash up.
And if I may add too, can I just please understand how the current community board, how the Hanmer Springs Community Board contributes to those long-term and annual plan processes, which obviously this committee attends as a submitter, but would a community board have more clout in those processes? I think that's me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So thank you, Roy. I think we can say that we've had a good interaction there. So I appreciate you making the effort to seek the opportunity to speak. You'll be aware there were a number of appellants, and you're the one person that's chosen to come to the screen. But I just want to acknowledge those appellants who may be online observing. We have read all of your submissions, and there is a pretty strong message there around the value of or not, and that's a decision that the commission is going to have to make in due course. And there is a comment around the cost implication of that. So we are very, very aware of the observations that have been made. So look, that rounds out this part of the process. Essentially, we need to have a break for a nice cup of tea, which Ali will give us some very clear instructions on before we break. And then we'll come back then for your right of reply, Mayor Black, where hopefully we're going to give you enough time. I know the team will be scurrying around in the background, writing epistles for you to read out. Yeah. But I would have thought that maybe, where are we now? I see we've got a 10-minute allowance. I'm not quite sure that's fair for the amount of, can we make that 15 minutes? I think to be fair to Hurunui, you need a bit of time. So I'm suggesting that we come back at 10:45 and we'll see where we go from there. And I will acknowledge that Commissioner Bidrose is in Wellington. She's got a heck of a full diary, so we just want to try and bang this through as efficiently and as practical, but also as respectfully as possible. So that's just kind of like where we're sitting at the moment. So Ali, just instructions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just a quick reminder that the live stream continues throughout the break. So if everyone could now please mute your microphones and switch off your cameras, and we'll see you after the break at 10:45. Thank you.
Courtney, did you get my text?
Yes, and yes.
Brendan, just
Yeah.
a query. Is it too late to ask the council another question? It should be pretty simple to answer.
Never too late.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to do it after they've done their?
No, before would be fine.
Welcome back. I think we're all on board.
Well done. Thank you.
Perfect.
I hope you got a cup of tea.
Oh, don't you worry. Don't you. Hey, look, just before you reply, Mayor Black, Commissioner Bigham's just got one little general question.
Thank you, Mayor Black. If I may, just regarding, I think you mentioned it as well, but one of the objections referenced the split decision and talked about who voted where. Can you just also just clarify how the South Ward councillors voted in that decision? So we get a sense of whether there was support from their own councillors for a community board or not.
Can I just be clear, are we talking about the membership or the subdivision?
Well, the whole context, what was sort of the feeling from those elected members from the area around the community board issue as a whole?
Okay, you might just have to give me a little minute to see if I get that for accuracy.
Thank you. Sorry to throw another one in the works there.
I know. Okay, so if I may, can I try and answer that right now? Are you happy? Yep. That I'm just going to double check that now that I've opened my mouth. Sorry. It was the 12th of March meeting. So I can confirm that, and I'll just need to look for the rest of it, that following the deliberation around the subdivision, that I'll do that. So the subdivision that I talked about, that split between the two subdivisions, the resolution of council on the 12th of March was council agreed that 5 elected members of the South Ward Community Board be elected at large. The motion was agreed on a majority vote, 6-3 on a show of hands. Now, out of the minutes, I haven't got that information on which councillors from South Ward, particularly which way they voted. We don't record that as such. Is that correct, Michelle? Can you help me there?
No, that's general process. Thank you. I just thought there may have been some record somewhere because it was referenced in one of the objections. So I just wanted some clarification. But if not, that's fine. I appreciate you looking.
Thank you. And then just, so that was around the subdivision, and then the council resolution on the same day, council established a South Ward, oh, beg your pardon, okay, let me,
Oh, wait, which, it's 11th of June.
It's 11th of June.
so that's the minutes of the 11th of June. So that's actually for the election of the representation.
We didn't have one for the 12th, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can, that's, yeah. So this is the minutes, this is the confirmed minutes from the 11th of June that the council established a South Ward Community Board with 5 elected board members and 4 council representatives from the South Ward. And as I said before, that was a majority of vote, 6-3. And I can confirm that it was on a show of hands, but the councillors that voted against that were myself, Councillor Bruton and Councillor White, who are both South Ward councillors.
Thank you.
Okay, so does that answer for you, Commissioner?
That's great information. Thank you very much.
No worries. So that's all in the minutes that you will receive as well. Thank you. So if I just want to put some closing remarks that I will begin with, and then I'll work through the questions. Hopefully we've been able to perhaps consider your questions. A couple of them we've probably bundled up, particularly around strategic direction, and hopefully that gives you clarity as well. But just on behalf of the Hurunui District Council, in closing, I wish to acknowledge the submitters and the appealants, their remarks in regard to their objection to the Hurunui District Council position for an elected community board. It is very rewarding and great for us to live in a community with such involvement and pride. And I think that is genuine, and you know, I just want to respond with that. But I will speak to my own key points as I see it. And as a district, we do seek to deliver strong representation. As you've already noted, and we've spoken about in questions before, but Hurunui District Council historically provides delegations to community committees equal to our existing Hanmer Springs Community Board, and should the Commission support and uphold the decision of Hurunui District Council, I believe that delegation would be staying consistent with that. You've already heard that Amberley and Leafield, or South Ward as we call it, is distinct given its service town to the majority of the ward. In the minutes of the 11th of June, one submitter commented for the democratic and transparent process, citing that all voters who get to see who is standing for an election. This is something that is absent in our current system. They get to learn a little more about someone through an election process. And those elected have a mandate from the whole community, not just interest groups. A public meeting, by comparison, can be stacked with candidates, friends, or voting, with only present at the first meeting of a new triennium being considered for voting. A stark contrast to a fully open and elected democratic process. Other submitters who were opposed to the proposal for change suggested the status quo by improving communications to community, while others suggested with representatives from existing community groups be reflected with community interests and provide that reasonable coverage. Submitters opposed to the proposal cited increasing costs to the ratepayers in the South Ward. Just before I answer your questions, I just want to say that as a council, we are confident that the working group did run through a strong and robust process. There was always full disclosure to council, and a variety of views around the table were considered with the integrity of a good system going forward. Hurunui District Council did consider all aspects of the proposed weighting of the current interest groups and the cost of ratepayers, but considering the best interest of the South Ward for the 2025 local body elections, a South Ward Community Board will provide the strategic direction required for good governance for the community that we represent. So with that, have got some answers, I think, coming for the questions that you've asked. And so I'm just reading them for the first time. Just bear with me. The concern around the youth voice, I will address that one first, and I'll try and work through these. But there was concern requested around the youth voice, and how those concerns might be addressed. We do have a very active youth council who would continue to have a strong influence and could attend and speak to a board if they wish to, or we could actually nominate a youth observer on a community board. Not too dissimilar to myself when I attend the Hannah Springs Community Board meeting. I'm not an elected member to that, but I can provide insights from a district perspective, and are asked to do so when I attend all Hannah Springs Community Board meetings. I'm going to talk to the population changes, and I'm going to ask Hamish, the CEO, to provide that intel for you. So if I can ask you to do that now, Hamish. I don't know whether you want the camera.
No, that's fine. So the total population of the Hurunui district in the 2023 census was 13,800, and those people are spread across about 8,500 square kilometres. In the South Ward itself, the population at the 2023 census was 5,620. If we go back to the 2018 census, the number was 5,210. So that's population increase of 410 over those 5 years, or 1.53% growth per annum. The average growth in the South Ward since 2001 has been 2.34% per annum. So it's grown pretty quickly. And I know that Roy talked about the number in Amberley Township. Amberley Township makes up about 2/5 of the population of the South Ward. The South Ward is much larger than just Amberley Township. So Amberley Township has a population of about, according to the census, of about 2,300, not the 3,000 that was quoted. Having said that, we've got significant concerns about the census data that's collected. So, for example, in the last 5 years, from 2018 to 2023, there were 375 residential dwellings built in the South Ward. But over that period, the census data shows a population increase of 410 people, which would suggest that there's about 1.09 people per dwelling. And given that the majority of these are 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings, it seems highly unlikely that the census numbers are correct. Particularly in the South Ward, average population per dwelling is 2.14. So we do have serious concerns about the census data as well.
Thanks, Hamish.
Thank you. There was several discussions noted around what's not working in the current in the status quo. And I guess our response to that is that the reality is that there is a focus on the local areas, and when it's not their area of interest, it's much easier to be caught in the trap of not contributing or giving effect to the whole district as a whole, particularly if it doesn't affect their community interest that they're representing. If there was a fully elected community board, they would be focusing on the ward as a whole, and that strategic would be across the ward. To give you an example of that, currently we have a fund, the Walking and Cycling Development Contribution Fund. This has been collected for a number of years now within the Amberley Township, but the committee has yet the ability to figure out how to best spend that. And we believe that an fully elected committee would actually bring that strategic focus to their lens and consider how best to spend funds like that will bring benefit to the community at large.
And what might the fund be sitting at the moment? Is that of utter curiosity?
Oh, is it about $1 million?
No.
$450,000 currently.
450.
Correct.
Over what period of time has that been collected?
2010.
Since 2010.
And that's the responsibility of the community committee to administer.
Correct. Correct. That's under delegation.
And that, so
No,
how's that collected again?
through development contributions.
Are you happy with that? Are you happy that that's sitting there?
Well, I guess that's what we're considering through a process of decision making.
Thank you.
And I guess just to add to that, if there has been any funds spent within the growth or considering the growth of this community, often those reserves money has been spent, the focus has been driven by officers of council as opposed to an elected community group that would consider how and best to drive the benefit of the community at large. Hopefully that has answered that question, and it's probably bundled up a few questions that have come from commissioners. And I guess as I spoke of before around the election process, with going through a fully elected process where candidates would talk to their community and consider their goals and vision, that would be part of a change of a fully elected community board. And at the current seating about being influential around council processes, it is important to note that currently a community committee of council, so the status quo, is unable to submit to a council process, being an annual plan or a long-term plan, because in effect they're submitting to themselves. So a better strategic focus would come through an elected format. The other question that has been raised by commissioners is around the 5 elected community board members and 4 councillor representation around that. It needs to be noted that because there's been some comparisons made by the Hamner Springs Community Board, whereas there is 5 and 1 elect, and I think Roy as a submitter actually talked about that, but we're talking about 2 quite distinctly different communities. And here in the South Ward, having 4 councillors around that table, our councillors historically and are currently heavily committed to their communities, and their input around that community board table is more valued, rather than actually splitting it out and having a halfway space of it through the trading, as was discussed by one of the submitters. So it is our belief as a council going forward that whilst it might look to be heavily dominant, the commitment of councillors to be a voice of and with their community, along with elected community board representatives, would be enhancing to that process rather than detrimental to that process. So that's just the numbers game, but I think it's, whilst you look to compare with Hamner Springs, they are still quite distinctly different communities of interest. And I think with that, have I answered all the questions? Oh, okay, thank you. I've just had a correction to the number. It's not 450,000, it's 370,000 that's sitting in the development contribution fund, waiting to be spent to bring the value to the South Ward. So that, pardon me on that correction. Thank you. So I think that I have provided you an insight in that right of reply, responding to the questions that you have asked. And as I've already stated, I feel very confident in the robust process that our council has gone through. The working group did a lot of the heavy lifting, and the reporting process into council has been clear, transparent, and helped us get to the decision that we have got to. So with that, I will offer my closing remarks and thank you very much for listening to our voice in the Hurunui. And I guess a question that I might have, and if I'm allowed to ask, how long do we expect to get a response for this?
We take forever. No, look, that's a fair question. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay. But first of all, I genuinely want to acknowledge the effort. Made you look very, very good, Mayor Black. The team in the background have done a great job in preparing for today. And I just want to make that acknowledgement to you. And to Hamish, you did get on the screen. It was that camera does move, so you thought you were missing out, but you weren't. So, and I didn't get the chance to acknowledge. I don't think was Councillor Harris there. Oh, rightio. Okay, she's hiding, but I just want to acknowledge her presence as well. So, so the process, as you've seen, is we've taken our course. Now we now go away and deliberate, and it's really best that I leave that to the CEO to give you the timeline, the realistic timeline that gets worked on in terms of getting that response back.
Thanks, Brendan. So the plan that we have, the scheduled sort of timeline that we're working to, is that our aim would be for you to have some communication from us within the next month to 6 weeks.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay. So with that point of clarity, we've now concluded the process and genuinely want to acknowledge the effort and the energy. Given this is the first one, we need to acknowledge Ali for the technology. I know in the background there's lots of discussions that go on. Different councils have different technology, and for those of us on this side of the screen is also the fact that we're spread across the country, so getting everybody lined up is a bit of a challenge. In fact, even internationally, you might have spotted that Commissioner Bigham is dressed for summer attire, and that will give you a sense that maybe she's not here in New Zealand at the moment. So thanks again. I'd just like to close with our karakia, and then in due course you'll receive our response. So in our closing karakia, unahia te uru tapanui kia wātea kia mama te nākau. Te tinana te wairoa e te ara takatu. Ko rā e rongo whakārea ake ki runga kia